What do you make of things like Zep-Tepi and the Sumerian Kings list, where you go back in time and you have these incredible ages of some of these rulers that ruled for thousands of years?
Well, what's really interesting is that if you overlay the Sumerian Kings list with the list of patriarchs, pre-flood patriarchs in Genesis 5, it's like a 1-to-1 match. So I'm not convinced that I think that the Sumerian Kings list is the ages is mythological. I don't think that they were ruling for thousands and thousands of years. Like I said, I see this very interesting overlay over the Genesis 6 genealogy. These are the patriarchs from Adam to Noah. And specifically, I mean, these are the patriarchs who lived before the flood. The flood came in the time of Noah. And, you know, there's a lot of debate right now, especially online, and I think you've had people here on your show as well, that talk about the Sumerian story being the oldest story and being our sort of the original story of the flood and of the antediluvian world. But I have a different view of that. I think actually the oldest story is the story of Enoch, is the Enochian story. I think that's the original story. And maybe some of this strangeness, maybe some of the bizarre things that we see and the stories of the flood and of the giants and all of that, maybe something like the Book of Enoch is actually an accurate account of affairs, of things that happen in the antediluvian world. And certainly the writers of the biblical narrative believe that. I mean, the writer of Genesis, and then obviously in the New Testament you have references to what I call the Enochian tale. And so when you think about the antediluvian world, the cataclysm that destroyed it seemingly overnight, the great civilizations that existed back then, you see a series of parallels in all the stories, all the ancient stories, whether it be the Sumerians, whether it be the ancient Egyptians, the Hebrews, the Greeks, the Romans. There are parallels in certain details. Great civilizations inhabited the earth, or at least a great civilization. That doesn't necessarily mean that they had the kind of technology that we have today. I think that's a mistake that some people make when they're thinking about the antediluvian world and a lost civilization. They think, well, that means that there were skyscrapers and automobiles and aircraft and things like that. That's not necessarily what it means. And so I think it's very, very interesting that you have all of these parallels, a cataclysm, giants. You have a fratricidal war that's discussed, for example, in you have the Vedas and some of the ancient Indian origin stories. And another component that you find everywhere is this idea that the gods descended to the earth, commingled with the human species, progenerated a race of demigods, in many accounts giants, who then governed the earth. And depending on what version of the story you're reading, they were either good guys or bad guys, leading up to the cataclysm that destroyed everything. You know, in the biblical account, the Great Flood, and other accounts record various kinds of cataclysm, right, all over the world. So the question is, I think, an intriguing question is it true? I mean, are these basic constituents of these stories, is it true? And I happen to believe that the Book of Enoch is the beginning of the Book of Enoch. The oldest portion of the Book of Enoch, called the Book of the Watchers, is the earliest account of the antediluvian world. And I don't mean necessarily the Book of Enoch that we have today. I mean the tradition of Enoch. Was there a manuscript that Enoch wrote himself? Enoch was the seventh from Adam. So he's one of those individuals on the Sumerian Kings list. I believe he corresponds to Endemoranki. I can't remember how to pronounce the name, in the Sumerian name. But again, you have this overlay with the pre-flood patriarchs. You have all of these details that correspond. Now we have evidence of cataclysm. We're finding evidence of cataclysm, right? We talked about the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. So are some of the other details true as well? Were there giants? Were there beings who descended to the earth in the antediluvian world? Did they copulate with human women? I mean, that's essentially the story of Enoch. Enoch begins with, this is first Enoch. Enoch begins with a company of 200 watchers, these beings that are designated as watchers. And they're heavenly beings. And the watcher designation is not exclusively extra-biblical. You find it in the book of Daniel, in a very interesting scene in which holy watchers are judging Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king. And they sentence him to a period of time of madness where he's given the mind of a beast and he's eating grass. And this is a judgment from the watchers. He's eating grass like an animal. And his hair grows long, and he's basically like a beast out in the field. The haughty king of Babylon, humbled in that way. And so the watcher designation is, you find it in Daniel. But then in the book of Enoch, it's much more specific. These were 200 of these watchers. These are non-human celestial entities. You could describe them as extraterrestrial entities. And they begin to lust after the daughters of men. And they desire to progenerate families. They want to have families.
Do you think that this is a simplification of genetic engineering, and that this depiction of it is just, like the game of telephone? You're telling the old story through oral tradition for a long period of time as it gets relayed over time, post-flood. So you get this sort of distorted version of what the actual event was?
I think it's possible there was genetic engineering involved.
Because we certainly look different than everything else on the planet.
Well, the book of Enoch, at least the Hebrew account, both in the book of Genesis, because there's a verse, Genesis 6, that says, "Now it came to pass that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives of all whom they chose." There were giants, or Nephilim, in the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men of old, the men of renown. That's the reference to the origin of giants and Nephilim in the book of Genesis. And so in the Bible you have these angelic beings, the sons of God, who are lusting. They're looking down at the daughters of men. They see that they're beautiful. The book of Enoch is even more explicit. The book of Enoch says that the angels of heaven, the watchers, lusted after the daughters of men, and they desired to progenerate families. So they descended to the earth on the summit of Mount Hermon, and they bound themselves by a pact of mutual imprecations. In other words, we're all in this together. They knew what they were about to do was going to be a very grave sin, so they bind themselves with an oath. That's why Mount Hermon has been known since time immemorial as the Mountain of Oath. Then they descended into the plains, and they began to choose wives from among the daughters of men with whom to copulate. But first, these were maidens that they intended to marry. And there was a transaction that happened, because in exchange for the maiden's hands in marriage, their fathers were given technology. So the watchers taught men the knowledge that they were already striving to learn. So that's implied in the text. It's not explicit, but it's implied, because the watchers give technology and they give knowledge, which results in technology, and they get in exchange the maidens that they desired to marry. And then they copulate with them. They have sexual intercourse with them. The women conceive and give birth to giants. And then these giants begin to terrorize the earth. They're cannibalistic. They begin to devour men.
So maybe a hybrid, sort of like a liger. You know how a liger is a combination of a tiger and a lion? Yeah. It's much larger.
Very large.
Yeah.
But they can't reproduce.
Right.
Yeah. So the result is you have these watchers, their DNA mixed with the DNA of human women produces giants. And this story, by the way, is attested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, not just in the Bible, not just in the Book of Enoch. The Book of Enoch, of course, fragments of it were discovered among the Dead Sea Scrolls. But you find You find this story in, for example, you find it in the Book of Giants, the Book of Jubilees, the Genesis Apocryphon, and other texts as well. And so this story, as bizarre as it is foundational to Hebrew cosmology.